Morning, everyone. We're letting people in from the lobby. All right, giving it another minute or half minute as we let more people sign on. It started in about 30 seconds, guys. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us right before the holiday weekend. My name is Maria Thacker-Gothi. I'm President and CEO of Georgia Bio, the state's life sciences trade association, working to support the biotechnology, medtech, and digital health community here in our fair state. I hope everyone's families are safe and well, and everyone is looking forward to a long weekend, and I'm sure a much needed break for many of us in our industry. We'll get started in a moment. I just wanted to address a few housekeeping, one or two housekeeping items. At the bottom of your screen, you should be able to view a submit a question button. If you have any questions during the program, please submit them there and they will be curated and given to our speakers. That said, we will answer as much as we can, but we can't guarantee all answers because we will be ending promptly at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. One other housekeeping item that I'd like to bring up is our next program will be next Friday at 11:30 a.m. instead of our typical 10. It will be a cybersecurity webinar designed for life sciences companies. We're presenting it in partnership with member company Cortelligent. It'll really be focusing on maintaining compliance in this new era of cybersecurity. So please join us. Please share this with your friends. Our programs are not closed to non-members. So if cybersecurity is top of mind, which I certainly hope it is for your company, please be sure to join us next Friday at 11:30, and you can find the registration link at our website. So with that, we have an exciting lineup today. As all of us know, we're experiencing a unique time, and during this this global pandemic, there's certainly challenges in our supply chain and keeping it operational during the crisis. So today we have a group of experts who will touch on, of course, Georgia's perspective and everything the state's experiencing as the huge supply chain hub that it is. But we can touch on how companies are really keeping their supply chains robust with the limited supply of key components, and how are they continuing operations and ensuring worker safety for them and their teams that are definitely essential workers during this time. And how do we continue to maintain that supply chain for life-saving therapies for patients during COVID? So with that, I'd like to thank again the state of Georgia, the Georgia Department of Economic Development, for partnering on this event, and Flexport and Alcon for joining to bring their perspectives as well. So with that, I'd like to turn this program over to Mary Waters, the Deputy Commissioner for International Trade with the Georgia Department of Economic Development. Mary?
Great, thank you, Maria, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and I want to thank Georgia Bio and my fellow panelists for taking the time this morning to talk about this important topic. So for those that might not be familiar with the Georgia Department of Economic Development and our role, I'll just give a brief 30,000-foot view. As Maria mentioned, I'm the Deputy Commissioner for International Trade with the department. But really, economic development as a whole, we are the sales and marketing arm for the state of Georgia. And our core mission is to support job creation and spur investment across various industry sectors and across all regions of the state. And we achieve that mission in a number of different ways. I work closely with my colleague, Jane Caraway, on the life sciences and biotechnology side to really make sure that our existing industry has the tools and the resources that it needs to continue to grow and thrive here in the state, as well as bringing new investment into the state to continue to build our ecosystem. The role of the International Trade Division is to work with our existing industry here in Georgia to open up global markets for our life science products and services. So, really our focus is export development and export promotion and making sure that our Georgia businesses have the information that they need to work directly with the appropriate partners in global markets to keep their sales moving globally. We have a team of trade managers based here in Georgia, as well as a network of 12 international representatives located all across the world in strategic markets. And those representatives are really boots on the ground, providing real-time intelligence to the Georgia business community and Georgia life sciences companies to help them make the best determinations of how to move forward in the international marketplace. So I think to kind of frame this discussion a little bit today and before we get into the other experts from Flexport and Alcon to talk about their experiences over the last 90 to 120 days, thought it might be helpful to talk about sort of what from a statewide perspective and an international perspective we were seeing in life sciences trade prior to COVID-19. What were we seeing, what were we experiencing, and kind of taking stock of where we are now before we start looking ahead to what the future terrain might look like. So from a Georgia state perspective, before COVID really took hold in the US, Georgia was celebrating a record year for international trade. Georgia, we're very fond of saying that the state is built for global trade. We're really kind of in the center of it. We're home to the world's busiest airport. We've got one of the fastest growing container ports in the country, and that really facilitates movement of passengers and products quickly and efficiently all across the world. And that is just one element that underpins Georgia's strengths in global trade. 2019 was a record year for trade and a record year for exports. I'm always really proud of that one. But last year, companies in Georgia sold $41.2 billion worth of products to more than 214 unique countries and territories all across the world. So that's an impressive footprint, and that's definitely something that we're going to do everything that we can to maintain the positive trends of trade from Georgia out into the world. Looking specifically at the life sciences sector, and this can get a little complicated with harmonized codes, but what we really call everything related to medical devices, medical equipment, and pharmaceutical related exports. In 2019, the life sciences community exported $1.9 billion worth of products and technologies to the global marketplace. And we've seen a really kind of a tremendous growth curve over the last several years. In 2019, exports were up about 8% over the prior year, and there was nearly a 10% jump from 2017 to 2018 as well. So we're seeing had been seeing a really positive trend line leading up to the early spring of this year. Our top markets are very diverse in life sciences: Belgium, China, Germany, Canada, and Japan. I don't think those markets will really come as much of a surprise to anyone, and they reflect some of our key trading partners as well as the makeup of the life sciences companies that call Georgia home. In terms of overall rankings, Georgia is typically 16th in the US in terms of export dollar value of exports of life science and pharmaceutical products across the world. So the fundamentals really were strong for the state going into COVID. You know, diverse industry base, really diverse mix of key trading partners that that really told a solid story. And I have to believe that those fundamentals are going to be something that we can fall back on to a certain extent in the recovery phase post-COVID. You know, we're a pro-business state. We've got a very diverse industry base, and we're globally connected, and that should help us really be resilient in the recovery phase here. But some things that we're tracking and some trends that we're tracking, you know, from the state's vantage point, I believe the recent experience has shown the importance of keeping supply chains open, whether we're talking about critical medical supplies or food security, and just keeping supply chains open and moving to the greatest extent possible has really been job one. And it's been challenging to see a number of countries, excuse me, really implementing export restrictions and doing some things that ended up hampering global supply chain. I'm happy to say that both the number of countries and the number of products that are subject to some kind of export restriction across the world, that's kind of stabilized, and in some parts of the world is coming down. But that's something that we're tracking very closely. And on the US side, from an export development perspective for our Georgia businesses, we have been following the FEMA actions very closely and their hold on certain kinds of critical medical supplies. We understand that focus is very narrow, but we have been working with some companies who, due to the nature of harmonized codes for export medical equipment that may go out the door, we have had some companies that have been caught up in a blanket FEMA hold, and we've been working with companies to help clear that backlog. So that's something that we're tracking. In terms of export finance, I know that the Export-Import Bank of the United States has also temporarily halted some finance facilities and export credit insurance for critical medical equipment, and that was meant to really bolster FEMA's actions to make sure that we have adequate supply of critical PPE and critical equipment here in the United States. So, you know, global supply chains, they're imperative. They're, you know, a lot of the life science industry is built on global supply chains, and we're talking about global companies that need to keep product moving. And so that's something that we're continuing to track. I think that it's really interesting, and I'm looking forward to today's discussion, that COVID has really prompted some debate and some discussion about the future of supply chains and the future of trade. And that discussion is happening kind of against the backdrop of prior global challenges, right? Ongoing disagreement about the future of global trade trends, right? The WTO is experiencing challenges. Those need to be worked through. You know, some countries are sort of taking a step back and being a little bit more protectionist in their approach to global markets, and we are seeing higher tariff levels than we have over the past few years in certain markets and for certain products. And so that really does have implications for Georgia's life sciences companies, where redundancy in supply chain is such a critical factor. So with that, I will turn it back over to Maria for the other speakers to provide their thoughts.
Great, thank you, Mary. That was very informative. Definitely sets a tone for this conversation. So next up, we'd like to welcome Matthew Marshall, Senior Director, General Manager of the Southeast Region at Flexport. They're a crucial part to the supply chain system, and I'm really excited to hear from Matt today. So Matt, hand it off to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Maria, and thanks for having me this morning. Hope everyone's having a great Friday as we head into this holiday weekend. As you mentioned at the beginning, I think we could all use a little bit of time here. I can say that for myself for sure. So let me start off by explaining a little bit about what Flexport does and who Flexport is. So Flexport is a licensed freight forwarder and customs broker built on a technology platform. So founded back in 2014 with the mission of making global trade easy for everyone. So as I'm sure everyone on this phone knows, it's a very ambitious mission, which is why we feel it's worth undertaking. And so over the last 6+ years, Flexport's grown tremendously fast. We're now 1,800 people globally, with 200 of those folks sitting in our Atlanta office serving the Southeast region. And so, that serves everybody from kind of east of Texas up through North Carolina. And so, if you look at, what Flexport's done over the last 12 weeks and what our focus area has been, I'll start a little bit kind of back in February to set the stage. So typically every, end of January, beginning of February, and I guess I'll just preface this story with the fact that Flexport is going to be very import focused. We do have a nice balance of exports as well, but I'm gonna talk primarily about the import side of things. And so as you look at Chinese New Year in terms of global trade, typically there's a 2-week period of time where China more or less shuts down, and the imports coming from China into the U.S. are very low. Ocean carriers blank their sailings, which means that they don't send ships to the U.S. And so that's a 2-week period of time, which typically creates a small backlog of cargo from China into the U.S. And so, as we all know, this year that was compounded with coronavirus, and that hit in China and then spread out globally into the U.S. And so, what you found is that it extended the period of time in which Chinese manufacturers could actually come back to work. And so that kept, call it 4, 5, 6 weeks of very, very low production levels. And so it created this very significant backlog of cargo coming out of China, and then obviously it spread more broadly. Then came the cancellation of all passenger flights in and out of China. And so what that did on the air side of international shipping was cut capacity in half. And so you kind of had this typical Chinese New Year hold that was exacerbated by COVID and created this significant backlog of what I'll call commercial cargo. And then really where the challenges began were trying to import PPE. Primarily at the time, masks, gloves has continued to spread out since then into gowns, ventilators, etc. The majority of which is all manufactured. The majority of global supply is manufactured in China, and so you had this very significant backlog with a significant reduction in capacity all at the same time. And so what that ultimately created was, for all the economists out there, and as you look at supply and demand very high, supply very low, prices go up very significantly. And so typically for air freight, if you want to air freight in a couple of cartons of masks, in a normal time, that's $3 to $4 per kilo from China to the US. We have seen rates over the last month up in the $17 to $18 per kilo range. And so, you can see how the challenges have grown, how expensive it has become to import these medical devices as PPE into the United States to keep everybody healthy. And so I would say over the last couple of weeks, we've started to see the market shift slightly. We've actually started to see rates start to come down a little bit, capacity start to open back up. It's a little bit too soon to say, what the recovery, total recovery will look like. But but it's very clear that there is a significant demand, and we expect that there's going to continue to be a significant demand for PPE in the United States, primarily being imported from places like China. And so if you look at, Flexport's involvements, call it 10, 12 weeks ago, we saw this trend coming. We used our nonprofit arm, flexport.org, to start to raise money to support the relief efforts. And that was really the intention at the beginning, was can we help raise funds to help offset the shipping costs, these really high shipping costs for import of medical devices to help save people's lives. And so what we found is that this very quickly translated into not only helping hospitals, helping government agencies. We had a number of clients that also wanted to import and help. And so if you look at the last 12 weeks, Flexport has raised over $8 million in our flexport.org fund to help offset the shipping costs for PPE in the United States. And we've actually been responsible for over 160 million units of PPE that we have supported the import process to help save lives in the U.S. And so our focus, continues to be getting as much of this product into the United States as we can. We do think that this is going to be the new normal for a while. I'll share a personal example. Yesterday I actually got on an airplane, which was much scarier than I had ever experienced in my life as someone's a frequent traveler. But to fly from Atlanta, from Hartsfield up to LaGuardia, everybody's in masks. Planes are 30-40% full. The boarding process is different. Like I believe that our lives are going to be very significantly altered for at least the remainder of this year. And so I think this PPE that everybody needs is going to become a part of normal life for a long time. So, we will continue to support that import process. We do expect on the international logistics side that, air freight rates will continue to stay fairly elevated. Until there is enough inventory of PPE in the United States that importers can start to import via ocean. The challenge is moving it via ocean from China to the U.S. Best case is 10, 12, 15 days versus air cargo you're going to get in a couple 2, 3, 4, 5 days. And so until there's enough inventory in the United States, we expect that to continue to stay high. And so Flexport is focused on, supporting relief efforts, supporting our clients on continuing to aid the relief effort and continue to supply the United States with as much PPE as possible in a very compliant way. I think we've all seen examples around the globe of counterfeit PPE showing up in different countries. We've seen a lot of regulation change. Just a couple of weeks ago, the FDA reduced the number of approved vendors in which could approved mask vendors for N95 masks. And so, I think Mary mentioned this. I mean, we've started to see some regulations constrain supply in this particular case. I think with the counterfeit nature of some of the some of the products we've seen in other countries, I think we need to balance the need of getting personal protective equipment in the United States, but making sure that it's authentic and making sure it's done the right way in a very compliant manner. So I'll go ahead and wrap up there. Happy to talk more about it during Q&A, but that is particularly been our focus over the last 3 months as the world has continued to evolve.
Great. No, thank you, Marshall, for that very helpful information and also your candor on the timeline of this, because I think that's certainly what we're hearing in our industry as well. Thank you for that. So next, I'm very excited to welcome Shay Foley, the GM over at the Alcon site up North Alpharetta here in Georgia. The Alcon's a large member here with the organization, but they also maintain a large workforce up in that region. and which is crucial to getting care to patients. And I'm really excited to hear about Alcon's experience and Shay's experience during these unusual times. So with, I will say that Shay is not on video today, so it'll be purely audio. But with that, I'll turn this over to Shay.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks for this opportunity to share a little information about Alcon. First, let me start at a high level because a lot of people on the call may not know who Alcon is. Up to a year ago, we were part of Novartis, and in May, this month, we just passed our 1-year anniversary. And what a pleasant anniversary surprise it was to have COVID-19 hit us in March. Alcon is a global leader in eye care with a heritage spanning more than 7 decades. And we offer the broadest portfolio of products to enhance sight and improve people's lives. Our surgical and vision care products touch the lives of more than 260 million people daily in over 140 countries globally. We address issues like cataracts, glaucoma, retinal diseases, refractive errors. So that's Alcon at a high level. Here in Johns Creek, in North Georgia, in Fulton County, on the campus, we produce contact lenses. And contact lenses, although not being recession-proof, are recession resilient. So we had to scramble quickly when we knew that this COVID-19 situation was getting a little more complicated than we had initially anticipated. So early on, and when I say early on, we looked at the situation, we said, okay, what's going on out there in the world? And we said, COVID-19 is a health crisis that in turn is leading to an economic crisis. So our first reaction was, because of the health and safety of our associates, we went out and we very early on procured a lot of PPE and disinfectants, etc. And we started ordering a lot of our PPE in early March. The global pandemic was announced on March 13th. So we had about a 10 to 12 day start over a lot of other companies. We scrambled and we bought PPE on the internet, anywhere we could buy it, eBay, Amazon, from our regular suppliers, etc. Here on the campus, we have 1,700 of, I would say, the best associates we can get anywhere, very committed. The campus here in Johns Creek is very much like a small university campus. We have 4 main buildings. We have distribution, we have research and development, we have the admin, and we have the manufacturing site. In the manufacturing site, we produce millions of contact lenses daily. And although it is a medical device and we work under strict compliance and regulatory requirements, the product does move very much like a consumer good. It's like a fast-moving consumer goods. So we have millions of our contact lenses produced daily. We have a distribution center that has tens of millions of SKUs and contact lenses on hand. We supply contact lenses for all of the needs of patients globally, from myopia, hyperopia, astigmatism, and presbyopes. And what that means is that there are a lot of different, what we call diopters, which are SKUs. So during normal business routine, pre-COVID, we had to keep a large inventory of our SKUs. When the pandemic hit, we were very well prepared for the protection and safety of our people. We had invested in a lot of scanning equipment, temperature scanning. We had ramped up our own disinfectant manufacturing, so we could make our own hand sanitizers. We have a lot of chemists on the campus. We limited the amount of people on the campus. We made sure that people, if they did come to work, we try to keep as many working from home, working remotely as possible. But if associates had to come on the campus, we mandated that they stick to their buildings so that if we did have an infection in one building, it did not impact the others. We reduced or eliminated all third-party traffic. We did not allow any of our deliveries, even the truck drivers that dropped stuff off on our docks. We didn't even allow them to come into the building to use the washroom. We provided all the best PPE equipment we could get. We've continued to enhance and improve on the technology for the scanning. We've used the best temperature scanning equipment that we could get our hands on. We originally started out by handheld scanners. Now we're using scanners that are used at the airports for scanning people coming off flights. People that come in that are scanned, including myself daily, we hand out a wristband that indicates we have been scanned, and we can wear that for the remainder of the day. All of these things we did to keep our operation going. So what were the surprises despite the good preparation? One thing we did not anticipate in our business, we always anticipate, we have to anticipate potential delays. We have specialist chemicals and components that come from different locations globally. So natural disasters like earthquakes in Japan, hurricanes in the Gulf, we always find a knock-on effect in our business. Not always, but most of the time. So we are prepared with contingency plans, business continuity plans, etc. This COVID-19 brought a new challenge, which was the air shipments had stopped. And we had to scramble quickly to find ocean routes to ship our product. So product that we might ship overnight from Atlanta to Shanghai or Singapore is now taking 4 to 8 weeks to get there. What we found was that as the market slowed down, our inventory slowed down as well. Our existing inventory slowed down. So that gave us some time to catch up and rebuild our inventory despite the slowdown moving from air to ocean freight. As regards to operation, we thought with the COVID-19 we may have associates impacted, that we may lose 10% of the associates here due to sickness or whatever. Thankfully that never happened, and partially probably because we were ahead of the game and got the PPE out and gave some PPE to our associates and asked them to wear it out in the community, because they're most likely not going to get infected at work, because we have extra cleaning crews going around doing constant cleaning, wiping of door handles, buttons on elevators, etc. So people most likely were going to get it out in the community, in the supermarkets, the ATM machines, the gas stations. So we provided some PPE to our associates to wear out in the community. So overall, we have weathered the storm here. It is a fast-paced operation here. The word I use is velocity. We move with velocity here. We'll continue to do so. We have not seen a significant reduction in orders globally. We've seen about a 20% reduction, but we expect that to pick up again here in the next month or two as the global economies pick up. That is Alcon in a nutshell, and I'd be happy to answer any additional questions.
Great, thank you, Shay. Really appreciate all your comments, and it's great to hear how you're supporting your team up in Johns Creek and making sure they're safe and well, not only on campus but also when they're out in their homes and their communities off campus. So definitely thank you for your leadership there. So we're going to move into the Q&A portion of this, and we've had some questions submitted in advance, and others that are popping up on the Q&A now. But to kick it off, I'm going to present the first question to Mary. With one of the busiest ports in the U.S. and the world's busiest airport, Georgia serves as a major gateway for international trade. How has Georgia's infrastructure reacted to the logistics challenges presented by COVID-19? What type of impact have you seen on the trade flows?
Thank you, Maria. Great question. So yes, Georgia, something that is seared into my mind when I first started with the Department of Economic Development is, what are Georgia's 3 selling points? And it was the 3 L's: land, labor, and logistics. And so really, Georgia is a logistics hub and remains one, even given today's challenges. I think that what I'll call exponential growth of at the port of Savannah and Brunswick has really kind of catapulted Georgia with regards to ocean freight. You know, the March numbers, and I suspect the April cargo numbers as well, will continue to show a drop. I think overall, because trade numbers tend to be a lagging rather than a leading indicator, it's going to take some time to really know how disruptive and how impactful COVID is going to be in terms of decreasing global trade flows. And the numbers are are pretty broad. I mean, the World Trade Organization estimates that global trade this year could fall anywhere from 13 to 32%. And that's a pretty big swing. And I think a lot is going to depend on, how quickly some economies can come back online and how we can keep some things moving. For me, looking at the export development side of things, we always look at trade in terms of longer term trends, as opposed to taking sort of an immediate snapshot of a very acute moment that we are in right now. I can share that just from an operational perspective, my trade managers, while our focus did shift during COVID and making sure that our companies, and especially our small companies, had some of the financial resources they needed to stay afloat and stay operational during this time. We also continued to field trade questions and companies that were needing to increase their global business development and companies that were actively exporting that needed some assistance with troubleshooting along the way. So that gives me some optimism that, again, the core fundamentals for Georgia, that we are such a logistically focused state. We have that direct connectivity to so many markets will really serve us well going forward in recovery phase.
Great, thank you for that. My next question was submitted during the conversation, and I think it's more for Matt, but Mary, feel free to chime in. But this person is curious to hear more about the freight that travels on commercial flights, and what does the process look like for how freight gets assigned to a flight. I know this has come up in a number of our programs we've been working on at the Crisis Coordination Center as well. Are there companies, brokers that connect freight shippers with unused cargo space on commercial flights?
Mary, you couldn't have teed me, or Marie, you couldn't have teed me up any better here for this. This is exactly what freight forwarders do. So yeah, I mean, so if you look at how air cargo moves around the world, there's really two ways. There are cargo dedicated planes, and they're filled with 100% cargo and pilots, right? And then everything else moves in the belly of passenger planes. And so with the restriction in and out of China, and I'll use that as an example, you really cut off 40 to 50% of the capacity going from China to the US. And if you think about, companies like, Delta, headquartered here in Atlanta, they have significantly reduced the number of passenger air flights across just about all of their primary lanes. And so even if you think about on the export side, from the US to Europe or the US to Asia or Latin America, that's how a lot of cargo moves. And so that cargo space is sold directly from the airlines, and they are typically sold to either, freight forwarders that then sell directly to customers, or depending upon the size of the customer, the airlines may sell directly to those customers themselves. And so those are really the two primary ways in which that air cargo capacity is assigned. It's really sold through freight forwarder brokers or directly through the airlines. But I would expect that capacity continues to stay very low until people feel comfortable flying again. And again, as somebody that did it for the first time yesterday, I think we are a long ways away from most Americans or most people globally feeling comfortable flying again.
Sorry, there you go. Sorry. Great, thank you, Matt, for that very thorough answer. So Matt, I'm actually going to stick with you. Can you tell us a little bit more about how Flexport adapted to COVID-19? What resources and services have you been able to offer customers, particularly in the healthcare sector, to help move critical supplies in a time when there are national export restrictions and rapid change in trade patterns?
Yeah, so I would say there are two primary, well, I'll call it three primary ways that we have adapted. The first is capacity. And so if you think about there are a limited number of charter planes that exist in the world today, right? And so some of that space is owned by carriers. Some, freight forwarders and their brokers may go lease space. And so we have actually leased a number of planes that we are using to import PPE and medical devices into the country. And so on any given week, we are moving 300 to 400 to 500 tons of PPE into the United States. And that's kind of been the run rate we've had for the last 6 weeks. And so I'd say the first is capacity on the air side. The second is we've started to offer premium services. As I said initially, air freight is $17 a kilo right now, right? Maybe it started to drop into the 13, 14 range, but it's still very expensive. And so we've started to create new ocean premium products, both on the full container side and the LCL, less than a container load side, to where you can move containers of equipment from, let's call it, again, I'm going to be import focused here, but if you call it from Shanghai to LA, you can move a container of goods in 11 days. And so if you look at the global air delays that occur because of the capacity, right? So reduced air handling capacity at just about every airport in the world. You look at the capacity crunch, or just infrastructure delays, I'll say. And so the ocean products have become more competitive. And then the third is our customs and compliance organization. We have invested very heavily in ensuring that we have really good line of sight to government agencies and can provide our customers with the most up-to-date regulation changes. Because over the past 6 weeks, 8 weeks, we've seen regulations change almost daily coming out of China. And then on the US export side, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, the restrictions around, primarily masks, but PPE being exported from the United States. And so in order for companies to do this that have really never done it before, you need the compliance expertise. And so we've invested pretty heavily there.
Oh, great. Thank you. So Shay, I'm going to shift to you a little bit off to a separate topic for Alcon. But before I dive into the question, can I first ask if, with the separation from Novartis, do you guys still have a shared supply chain at all with Novartis, or is that fully separated now?
It's fully separated. However, we have had some legacy relationships with vendors, but officially we are separated. And also, a lot of our particular components or ingredients or chemicals are quite unique to us. And there really isn't a lot of opportunities here locally for us to maximize the Novartis benefits from a scaling perspective. However, every opportunity that does exist, we try to exploit it.
Great. So you don't have any shared supply chains with anybody at this point then, and couldn't comment on that?
There are some, but they're more, we have a couple of opportunities still being bundled, but we've now more internally focused within the Alcon different divisions, like the surgical, the cataract, the contact lenses. We're more internally focused now than previously.
Excellent. Okay, so then I'm going to pivot to a different question. So as a recession-resistant manufacturer, as you said, do you anticipate any long-term impacts on the global healthcare supply chains from COVID? I realize that's a broad question. And if so, how are you guys structured at Alcon to respond and adapt?
We don't expect to see a significant change. We spend a lot of time and energy on our supply chain. We see our supply chain as an opportunity to enhance customer experience, also to understand market demands, and we use predictive tools and commercial insights, gathering as much intelligence out there as we can. We have seen a slowdown. We did expect that, but we expect that things will return to normal, and we're planning for that return to normal here. We expect to be going back up to full production back in June or July, in the next couple of months. So we don't expect any long-term impacts.
No, that's great. So pivoting off of that, I'm going to shift back to Matt and then go to Mary on this. Matt, can you, as we move forward in the COVID recovery, do you expect to see a shift in how companies structure their supply chains to better insulate themselves from this type of risk?
Yeah, so I actually did a webinar on this a couple of weeks ago. I think you're seeing a number of interesting trends. I think you're seeing, one, supplier diversification. I think, those that are heavily reliant on one primary supplier, if that supply chain is disrupted, they're tremendously exposed. So I think you're seeing in some cases, and again, I'm going to, talk more commercial cargo than necessarily just medical device or pharma, but I think you're seeing kind of a China plus one, strategy for supplier diversification. I also think on the supplier side, you are looking at companies bringing some production closer to the end customer. And so one of the biggest, and I'm not saying that's necessarily all in the United States, although I have had a number of customers that have moved some stuff to Florida, for example, but places like, Mexico, Canada, Latin America, where the transit time is just shorter to get product to their customer. The biggest challenge there is, infrastructure. I shouldn't say the biggest because there's a number of them, but it's infrastructure, it's quality, and it's raw material. I think, needing all of those inputs in new countries where you haven't manufactured before is important. And the last one I'll say, as you think about demand, demand signals for the remainder of the year and beyond, I think inventory levels matter a lot right now. And so I think you're seeing companies where historically supply chains have been very just in time, not as much on the pharma side, as typically you're going to hold more inventory there because the worst thing you can ever do is run out of a product. But if you think about, just in time supply chain, lean inventory, and not holding a lot of excess inventory and tying up working capital, I think we're going to see a shift in that, because when demand signals pick up for your industry again, if you're not ready and prepared to deliver to customers, somebody else will be. And so I think you're going to see inventory levels rise, reorder points rise, in order to respond when those demand signals pick up. So those would be the primary changes that I think we'll see for the remainder of this year and into next year.
So I think the question submitted actually is a good follow-up to that. So when considering trade-offs between low-cost price or shorting lead time, which is important? And
the answer is always both, right?
Yeah.
There's no, it depends on your business. To me, I'm actually seeing companies have, for the first time in a long time, put cost not number one on the list of supply chain, because if you can't get product, it doesn't matter how low cost it is, right? And so, cost is very important, and, people aren't looking to spend more money in a time when consumer demand is lower for a lot of products. But I think we are starting to see a more balanced approach, or I think that's what we will see in the future.
No, that's great. And I'm going to pivot back to Mary, and at the end, I'll make some comments on the pharma side of things. But Mary, many private sector enterprises have pivoted their operations to fill the gap in PPE shortages. Can you talk about public-private sector initiatives at the state level to develop capacity for critical supplies?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to talk about that. And, this is an area that has given me a lot of optimism, and it's really, it's just really great to be associated with a state and a business community that has chipped in the way that Georgia's community has, I think, to address the challenges that we're facing right now. But really, so our Department of Economic Development, we were involved kind of at the front end of the crisis, and with our centers of innovation, of identifying first off, identifying suppliers and manufacturers of PPE and critical equipment that we could share with GEMA for large-scale bulk purchase orders that could go to top-line healthcare response in the state of Georgia. And as case levels stabilized and GEMA, we didn't need as many bulk purchases. We saw that shift to needing local hospitals, local governments, local businesses needing this PPE. On the state side, our focus really shifted to which companies in state were currently supplying or could pivot their manufacturing relatively quickly to supply these products to essentially the statewide business community. And so our centers of innovation have been kind of front and center in helping companies that maybe just need a couple of tweaks to shift their existing manufacturing and maybe add a new line. We've been helping companies do that. On the trade side, we've been helping companies identify new sources of supply, both domestically and internationally to help keep these products moving within Georgia. But in terms of the public-private partnership, I think there's a couple of great examples. I think Coca-Cola donating products so that Georgia Tech could manufacture surgical face shields on Tech's campus. All of the work that GCMI is doing with private industry, with 3D printed materials and getting FDA approval for some new adapted products that can go to the medical response. I think the totality of the response kind of reflects something that Georgia has always really prided itself on, which is partnership approach, right? And state agencies working together, the state working with the private business sector that can sometimes move more quickly and adapt more quickly to get products and solutions to the places they're needed most. And so I do think that the COVID response has really proven that businesses have stepped up and are continuing to step up, and whatever we can do to facilitate to keep these products moving, we'll continue to do it.
Yeah, that's great. And we're certainly seeing partnerships across the country and across the world that are really making a difference. I know that we'll continue to see that as this continues to progress and as states also and countries reopen, quite frankly. So we're at about 8 minutes. I want to ask Shay one last question. So Shay, Alcon operates in, I think, 70 markets and serves patients in more than 140 countries around the world. What has been the biggest challenges in navigating the healthcare crisis, and how have y'all adjusted operations to service the global customer base? I think you touched on it earlier, but giving you an opportunity to dive in a bit more.
Sure. Well, Alcon has, as a global company, we have a diverse manufacturing footprint, a large inventory on hand, and numerous business contingency plans to ensure our supply chain is maintained. And during this crisis, all of this planning and all of the infrastructure we had built kicked in well. So the planning we had, not necessarily for COVID-19, but being a global manufacturer and being aware of potential issues, like I mentioned earlier, we've had force majeure events in different markets. We've already had plans in place, and they all kicked in and they worked well during the COVID-19 crisis.
No, that's good. Definitely preparedness is something we see our big companies doing a great job of. So we don't have any more submitted questions, but I want to queue up a concept and something that Pharma actually just released a great piece on yesterday. So geographic diversity is key in the stability of manufacturing supply chain for medicine. So again, this is more on the pharma side of things, but it's definitely understandable that there are concerns regarding continuity of the pharma supply chain and frankly device supply chain, and desire for the U.S. to not be overly reliant on countries that might potentially pose a national security risk or just be going through whatever it might be they're going through but I didn't know if y'all wanted to comment on or able to comment on the importance of geographic diversity in supply chain at all. And again, this might be back to Matt, to be quite frank.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes a little bit to my earlier point, right, of having production close to customers. I think, I've recently kind of read through a very interesting BCG study that just talks a lot about regionalization of supply chains. And so as you think about, having manufacturing in the region in which you're serving customers, you're inherently just reducing the risk, and you're putting product closer to customers. And so, depending upon what your supply chain looks like, this combined with, what we saw in 2018 from a tariff perspective, these two things combined may finally force companies to rethink that regional model versus being really reliant on low cost areas of manufacturing, long lead times, long transit times. It's just very disruptive. It's easily disrupted when things like this occur. And so I think we're seeing a lot of companies rethink their model. The challenge is it's going to take time, right? We're still, if you think about the tariffs from 2018, it's very hard to just pick up and move, out of China into Southeast Asia, into India, into, some of the lower cost places in Europe and Latin America. And again, the raw material supply has to be available. So I think what you may see is potential regional structure, as well as, potentially more postponed production. So this is a strategy that's been around for a long time. But bringing either, raw material, semi-finished goods closer to the customer, and then being able to finish those goods and finalize the product. Prior to Flexport, I worked with, Deloitte Consulting in their strategy and operations practice, and we worked with a large pharma and medical device company in New Jersey. They're all up there. And so one of the strategies we looked at with them is, they had a bunch of repack and relabel facilities, trying to take, for medical device in particular, and they were trying to take that product, repack, relabel for country requirements. And so that's particularly challenging with the finished goods. And so you may see some more postponed production being brought to regions.
Yes, no, definitely. And I think there are just a lot more complexities in our industry, especially on the pharma side. Putting all your eggs in one basket is risky, but at the same time, scaling a facility, getting the approvals and meeting the regulatory requirements is definitely not an overnight process. It can take many, many years. So there is some just, there's a lot of things to weigh in making those types of decisions. So with that, I wanted to ask Shay and Mary if they had any closing comments before we shut this off. Shay, anything final you want to say about Alcon and your COVID response?
No, just I want to thank you for the opportunity, and I hope everybody on the call is doing well, and I look forward to coming out the other side of COVID-19 strong.
Mm-hmm. And Matt, did you have anything else? I apologize, I didn't really give you that opportunity a second ago.
No, listen, I've had plenty of time today on this call. I would echo Shay's comments. Everybody, stay safe and enjoy the long holiday weekend. We will all get through this. I think life will look different on the other side, but I think we'll all get through this and be okay.
No, I completely agree. I do think it will look different, but hopefully definitely for the better. But Mary, thank you again for supporting and partnering with us on the program. But any final comments from you in the state?
Just hope that everybody stays safe, stays well, enjoys a holiday weekend reprieve. But on the business side, I would just say that, the state is tracking global developments really closely, because it really is fundamental to the work that we do. And so just for the Georgia business community and the Georgia bio community, if you've got questions or just want to start the conversation about anything that was discussed on the call today, please reach out. We're here to help and make sure that business rebounds as quickly as possible, and that our business community is supported.
No, that's great. Thank you, Mary. And for those on the call, do know you can go through Christina and I to get to Mary and EJ Caraway also, who sits on our board. We have a great relationship with the state. We really are grateful to their ongoing support and partnership. It was outstanding to hear from Flexport. Matt, definitely you were a hot speaker today. And Shay, thank you for your time and most importantly for keeping your employees safe while still providing those important products to consumers and patients around the world. Safety and efficacy is at the core of everything we do in our industry, no matter which area of that industry you fall in, medtech or biopharma, therapeutics. It's something that despite the urge to rush and to move quickly on things, which is important, we need to remember that safety, efficacy for all of the patients and all of our employees working in these settings is really important. And of course, making sure that the supply chain stays strong is something that we're all keeping top of mind to make sure we can continue to get things to patients. So thank you all again very much. Thank you to our members and non-members that joined us. I wish you well this holiday weekend. I hope you get a nice mental health break and you continue to remain safe and well. And we hope to see you next Friday on our cybersecurity webinar on the 29th at 11:30. So with that, I'll close this out and thank you again to all of our speakers. Bye.